Bruce, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
The states I'm in, I can't help but think about the states that you're actually in.
Yeah, I know. There was a little bit of a pun in there, not a deliberate one particularly, but I was aware of it once I'd written the song. I mean, obviously, there's some connection there. I'm not sure. Like I said, it wasn't really deliberate, but there is one.
You are living in the U.S. now?
I'm living in the U.S. I've been living in San Francisco for about 8 years.
How do you find it?
I have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah?
I'm married to an American. We have a kid, and so it makes sense to be living there. She's got a job there. My wife does, not the kid.
You don't have her put to work yet, I understand.
We haven't put her to work yet, no. We'll wait a little bit for that.
Yeah, clean out the chimney.
Yeah. And get her doing commercials or something. But San Francisco is a beautiful city. It doesn't have the much left of the kind of mythic vibe of San Francisco that we carried for many decades from the 60s onward, at least, and maybe before. It was a pretty legendary place before the 60s too. But it's so ruled by the tech industry now and money. I mean, I guess it always was ruled by money, but that had a more diverse face at one time, and it doesn't now. I mean, I don't mean diversity in an ethnic or gender sense. There's plenty of that in San Francisco, but culturally, it's a monoculture. It's like Ottawa. It's like in the sense that Ottawa is a government town, and there's not really industry. There's not much of a blue collar presence. It just is what it is. I'm talking about the Ottawa I grew up in. I suppose I don't know it well enough now that people might argue with that now. But San Francisco, I was shocked actually to discover that it kind of felt like the Ottawa that I grew up in. And
great, because we think about Haight-Ashbury, we think about Country Joe McDonald and the Grateful Dead, and we think about this in San Francisco. But it's a den of capitalism, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's still there's a greater presence of that old stuff that you're talking about in Berkeley across the bay. But even there, I mean, it's just too expensive to live there for there to be much of a counterculture. I mean, it's you have to have a lot of money.
So how does that change how you write songs down there?
Well, what's changed how I write songs isn't so much about the place. It's never really dependent on the place. Many of my songs reflect the physical surroundings in which they were written, but it could be anywhere. But having a child, having a 5-year-old has changed that a lot, and it's different now. I mean, I have an older daughter who lives in Montreal who has 4 kids of her own.
And she must be 40 now?
Jenny's 41.
Yeah.
So, it's really the presence of a child day to day that makes a bigger difference to how I write. I mean, just technically how I write, when do I get to do it, and how I go through my day to day. So I'm used to a much freer kind of day to day than I've been dealing with for the last 5 years. But I guess I'm getting used to that too.
Is she changing the content of the songs you're writing?
Not that I notice.
No.
I mean, I've never paid much attention to where the content comes from. I just wait for the good idea, and when it comes, I try to write it down. Mm-hmm. So, I'd have to really look hard at the songs to tell you if there was a connection there.
I know. The reason I ask is because I think when parents, especially parents who have younger children, create art, it can often be steeped in some kind of anxiety of the world that they may have to grow up in.
Yeah, well, I think all parents must worry about that. I mean, any parent that cares, at least, is going to worry about what kind of world they're handing their kid. Mm-hmm. And most people, most of us in general, don't have much we can do about it. We have opinions and feelings, and those things, may inspire us to recycle or to, support organizations that are doing work we consider worthy and that sort of thing. But to that, people in our position can add the fact that we have a certain public voice that I think deserves to be used to accomplish something good. And the most pressing need for that kind of right now seems to be an environmental one. Although in the context of the U.S., there's a big question mark around the future of American democracy too, and it's kind of depends on the angle you're looking at things from, but that's kind of worrisome. But whether again, like how much that shows up in the songs, I think it does. That those kinds of feelings certainly show up in states I'm in. They're not really explicitly expressed, but they're there. Otherwise, it's a kind of general condition, and you can say, yeah, it's in the whatever art I make, because it is a general condition, but it doesn't mean that I'm writing songs about that.
It's funny because you said that this is not an overtly political record, and I think that was a bit of a surprise to some, given that in the past you've written. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to characterize you as a protest singer or someone who's only ever written political songs. I mean, some of my favorite songs of yours haven't necessarily been, I would say, social justice or politically oriented. But I was surprised, given the political climate, where it seems like non-political songwriters are writing political albums, that you would describe this record as a non-political one.
Well, I mean, what's a political song? I'm not sure what people mean by that, and I've always disliked the tendency we all have to categorize things,
to genreify things.
Yeah, if I had a rocket launcher, a political song, well, from a certain point of view, it is, but it's also very personal. It's an expression of an intense feeling that I had and that I wanted to share with people. Mm. So it's really. I mean, when we write, I think when we make any art, we're feeding ourselves in a way. We are the target audience, the artists themselves, and you may imagine how, and I certainly do. I imagine how people are going to take what I write, and I try to make it say what I want to say in a way that people will understand. But really, I'm writing for an audience of me. And
has that changed over time? Is that new, or have you always felt that way? Does being in an industry for 50 years change whether you care too much about what your audience thinks about the songs?
No, it's been the same all along.
Really?
From that point of view. I mean, I don't think I would have been able to articulate it that way in the beginning. I probably didn't understand that, but I came to understand it. And I think it works. I mean, I don't think that renders the work any less legitimate to say that, because the stuff I experience in my life isn't so different from what everybody else in the world experiences. I mean, there are major differences on the surface, but the essentials are pretty much the same for all of us.
And you don't feel any obligation to the fans who have loved the rocket launcher, who have loved Coldest Night of the Year, to give them something like that?
If I do a show, I feel like I'm going to do those songs because people paid good money for a ticket and they want to hear them.
Do you enjoy playing them?
Not if I had a rocket launcher particularly. I mean, it depends it varies from night to night. But that song, when I perform my songs on stage, I shouldn't generalize about this. I don't know what other people do, but for me, it's kind of like method acting. I have to go where the song is.
What do you mean?
I have to put myself in the state I was in when I wrote the song.
Wow.
To sing it, to make it mean something. So that it's not just going through the motions, right? And I don't like to go into the state I was in when I wrote If I Had a Rocket Launcher. I don't like that state one bit. But that said, I mean, I'm grateful for the fact that people have received that song with favor, and I want to perform it for people.
There are performers who don't. I mean, there are performers who won't play the hit. There are performers you go to see. I'm giving it as an example here. You go to see James Taylor, and he might not do Sweet Baby James. You got to be okay with that. I mean, when I saw you with the Songwriter Circle in Ottawa, you did Wondering Where the Lines Are, you did Lovers in a Dangerous Time, and you did Rocket Launcher.
That's a contextual thing. I mean, you wouldn't hear all those. Well, actually, those three you probably will hear in the shows we're about to be doing. but Wondering Where the Lines Are had to lie fallow for quite a long time.
Really?
At one point, because I just got so tired of singing it that I couldn't give it anything anymore, and that has rocket launchers come and gone like that, depending not just on my fatigue with it, but on how I think it's going to fit with the mood of an audience. Like after 9/11, I didn't sing it for quite a long time because I felt like it would be playing to the wrong body of public emotion. And So, but then after a while, it came back in, and you know,
Do you remember the first time you played it afterwards?
no,
No.
no, I don't really know. I just after a while, it just seemed like okay, well, it's all the hubbub's died down, and people can be thinking again, you know, because there was just so much of an emotional, especially in the U.S., and less so elsewhere, but in the U.S., it was really, you know, people were really upset about 9/11, and as they should have been, but the way that feeling expressed itself publicly was not always very healthy. It's like, you know, the "let's go get 'em" thing, and if I didn't want to be sort of promoting that side of things or supporting that side of things, so it seemed like Rocket Launcher would play to that. So I didn't do it for a while. But you know, once that kind of died down and people were back on their emotional feet, it seemed okay.
Bruce, these are beautiful songs on the new record.
Oh, thanks.
And but I can't help but think that you could just be not here. You could be on a beach down in Berkeley with Iona, with your daughter, sipping on a margarita, or you know, or
I can sip on a margarita anywhere I go these days.
What keeps you creating?
It's a kind of biological urge.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of like the urge to go to the bathroom. I mean, it's like you know, it builds up and builds up and builds up, and I have to write a song. It's always been like that.
That's the best analogy I've ever heard for it. All right, well, let me ask you this then. You're going on about 50 years as a singer and a songwriter. I can stop reminding you of that if you'd like.
No, it's okay.
You're about to be
I'm
inducted.
reconciled to it.
You've come to terms with it. You're being inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. How do you measure success?
You know, I don't think about it, and I never really have. I mean, well, that's a bit glib. What I think of as success is writing a song that communicates with people and getting to perform it for them. And it sort of doesn't matter if there's 6 of them or 600 or 6,000. It's from that point of view. I mean, in other ways, it does matter. Of course, it's the bigger the audience, and you know, the bigger the scale that everything can happen on. So I can have a band and I can have a tour bus and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, from the creative point of view, it's not. I don't know. I never really thought about success particularly. When I started, I dropped out of music school after a couple of years when I realized that the kind of composition that I was studying, which was jazz oriented, and you know, would have qualified me to write music for large jazz ensembles, which I thought I wanted to do when I went there. I became aware that wasn't really the path I should be on, and so I dropped out. And when I dropped out, I had no idea what was going to be next. It just seemed like this is the next step. It was a step into the void, basically, and it just seemed so necessary. It wasn't even really scary. I was worried about how my parents would receive the news, but other than that, it just was like, this is what has to be done now. And as far as I knew, I might end up playing guitar for pennies on the street.
And you're okay?
And that was fine. It was really, I just knew that my life was going to be about music and about the guitar. And that was enough. And there was a few years after that where, you know, it got a little frustrating at times because nothing much seemed to be happening. I mean, I was in and out of a number of different bands. I learned a lot during that subsequent few years of the second half of the 60s, basically. I learned a lot about music and a lot about life and a lot of stuff, but I didn't really have much of a sense of direction until the end of that decade, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, okay, solo singer-songwriter stuff. You know, it just seemed I'd been playing in bands of varying degrees of psychodelicity.
Yeah,
if that's a word.
It is now,
and
I'll tell you that.
It just seemed after a while everybody. I was sick of big long guitar wanks, and the audience was too.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, that wasn't literally true across the board. There are lots of people that continued to love that stuff, and I actually have a certain affection for it too.
Oh yeah,
but,
of course.
But I got tired of being involved in it, and I thought, you know, if I just do these songs by myself, for one thing, they're going to come out the way I want them to, and for another thing, I think people are going to be interested in hearing them, and it turned out to be the case. So from then, I kind of understood where I was going, but still not with any sense of a long-range plan, because it's just, okay, well, this is the next step. And, I guess it's just been the case over my life in general that, from time to time another step appears and, another door opens saying step through this. And, that's what I do.
This is the part of the interview where I'm supposed to ask you to play another song. But before I do that, it's kind of a question I've always kind of wanted to know. I don't even know if it's going to make it in the interview. Sure, it will. You and I played together at a festival, I think it was the Ottawa Blues Fest, 7 or 8 years ago. And I've seen you at a couple of events. We've done a couple of events, at least on the same stage since then. And one thing I've always noticed is that for at least an hour before you go on stage, you're playing the guitar. And even after, I've seen you after the show playing the guitar.
Probably because there was something else I had to do after, because that's less normal for me. But before and the older I get, the more this is true. I like to have a lot of warm-up time.
Yeah, a lot.
And Bernie, my manager, used to comment on the fact that back in the 70s when I was starting to do theater shows, I would basically play the whole show in the dressing room beforehand. And it was because I was so insecure. I wanted to remind myself that I actually knew these songs.
But you can't be anymore. I mean, you must know how good you are at the guitar.
Well, I know what I can do when it's working right.
Yeah.
but I don't take it for granted that it's going to work right. And like I say, the older I get, the longer it takes to get the fingers working.
How are they feeling?
They're painful.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're arthritic, and there's some cartilage missing here and there, So that's what really Bone on Bone is about.
Do you worry about it? Do you worry about not being able to play someday?
I don't really worry about it. I anticipate a day when I won't be able to, but so far I'm getting away with it. So.
Sonny Rollins said to me the other day, which, by the way, is the coolest sentence I've ever said in my entire life.
That's a pretty cool sentence.
Yes.
I'm appreciating that.
Sonny Rollins said to me the other day, he can't play the saxophone anymore.
Right.
And I said, so what do you do? I asked him a similar question. He said, I still practice an hour every day, just in my head. I run scales. I listen to tunes, and I improvise over them, all in my head.
Wow.
Do you relate to that?
Well, I do in a way. I mean, I don't know that would be my way of dealing with not being able to play. It might be. It's not something I've had to confront at this point, but it's interesting to hear that. That's especially. It makes sense for somebody like him who's so attuned to an improvisational music like that, and so deep into it. There were stories about him when he was so famous in the 50s or early 60s for being a great saxophone player, and then he dropped out.
But he played saxophone on the bridge.
Yeah, he became a kind of a New York legend because he was, I guess, the George Washington Bridge. He'd get up in the rafters of the bridge and be playing the saxophone. People walking by at night would hear this unearthly music, and he got a reputation for that. But then it was basically a kind of woodshedding. He was learning new things, teaching himself new things, and then when he figured he had enough of those, he came back into the world and blew everybody away.
So a couple of weeks from now, if you're walking by the Rideau Canal, keep your ears open.
Well,
you'll hear Bruce Cockburn.
It might not be the Rideau Canal. Well, but yeah. Well, it's fun to play outside. The problem is if you're trying to seriously practice, you have to be somewhere inaccessible like that, because otherwise, if you're doing anything interesting, people are going to stop and listen, and then they're going to want to chat, and then you don't get any work done.
Well, I tell you, when you were I think you were in a trailer outside the Ottawa Folk Festival one year. You played with a great cellist that year. I can't remember her name right now. It was she got up with you and played a couple of songs.
Ann Davidson. Yeah.
Ann Davidson, yeah.
Right.
And we all stood outside your trailer and listened to you practice the guitar. I might as well tell you that.
Confession.
For at least an hour. Bruce Cockburn, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.